Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming out today. It's the Lord's been good. He's going to hold the rain off till we're through today, okay? So thank you for coming. We've got a fascinating subject today, and I can't think of anything more topical. We started planning this 6 months ago. Energy was not on the front burner of the Houston Chronicle or anything else. And so it's amazing how quickly this industry changes. It truly is feast, famine, boom, and bust. And we've set up some interesting panelists and topics of conversation for you today. First of all, I want to thank our program committee for putting together these programs that we have for you. We try to do this to interest our directors and our C-suite executives and all of those attendant people that work there. So we need your input in this. Let's get right into the program. We have an exceptional panel lined up for you, again, on a topic that I think is topic du jour. I think it's number one, at least all the boards at meetings I've been in the last month and a half. This is what we call damage control. And how do we get out of this, and what does the future hold? Let's talk about our panelists today. We have a great group of panelists for you. First of all, our moderator is the distinguished Paul Hobby. And first of all, I'd like to say, Paul, thank you from behalf of all Houstonians here for the work you've done as chairman of the Greater Houston Partnership this past year. We truly thank you for everything you've done. In your packets are the complete bios on all of our speakers, and so take a moment to look at those. What I'd like to do is just give you an interesting factoid about each of our speakers today. Paul is smiling today because Paul's oldest daughter is engaged to be married. Number one. And I told him the best is yet to come, because when you're a granddad, it gets great. Bill Gilmer, interesting factoid on Bill is actually a real old Texan. I don't mean by age, but he's sixth generation Texan, and I don't think many of us in here can say that. Dates all the way back to the days of the Republic, and one of his family members was the first county judge for the county of Fannin, Texas. So that's a lot of history. And finally, Steve Murdoch. It was interesting when I asked everybody about what would you like people to know about you. They're very hesitant. But he looked at me and said, well, I think the one thing that I think I'll probably be the only person in this room on is I was born and raised in North Dakota. So I thought I'd ask, has anybody else been born and raised in North Dakota in here? Steve, you're a winner. All right, without any further ado, I would like our panelists to come up on stage, please. And I'll turn it over to Paul.
Okay. Well, thank you, Will, on behalf of the entire panel, for all your kind words. As you say, you know, the ironies here are delicious. They just sort of spread in all directions, because I've spent the last year going around Houston talking about prosperity and responsibility, and that at the top of a cycle we needed to behave in a certain way because there'd be another part of the cycle, whenever that might come, hypothetically, but clearly it would be well after I had left the GHP. Well, the worm turned, on my watch, and so, echoes of those comments, come back to haunt me. Not necessarily haunt me, but I do think that Houston has behaved well at the top of the cycle, and I do think 103,000 jobs created per year, August to August, is not sustainable. So in some ways, we want this tap on the brakes, but the question is, is it a tap on the brakes or is it a death slide? Whenever you look at an oilfield service business, whether it's to lend to it or to invest in it, the question that always comes forward is, how leveraged are they to the drill bit? Well, that's the same question we're asking ourselves about Houston today, and in some ways, that's what this panel discussion is about. But again, is it a healthy breather? We always have to remind our brethren at the Chronicle, surprisingly, but also around the country, that the energy complex is E&P, midstream, and downstream, and we're talking about the E. and so there's a lot more to the energy complex than just drilling, but certainly it's the sexiest and it's the most visible part of the cycle, and commodity prices are going to affect the whole value chain in the industry. So, how long, how deep? Obviously, it's a supply side problem. You could have, one of the things is 6 months ago when we were planning this, we were thinking about a much different conversation. And 6 months ago, you hated your decline curves. Well, now you hug your decline curves because, that's what's going to put the S back to the D. But, with Putin alive in the world, there could be exogenous shocks. You could have Iran drop, you could have Libya drop, you could have, a correction that would bring S back to D a lot faster than the decline curves. But that's why this is fun. This is why that's fun, because you don't know. The V-shaped, U-shaped, whatever. There's a lot of conversation at our table this morning, and it's all fun to talk about these things. But you plan for the U and you hope for the V. So these are interesting times, and interesting times call for wise men. And on my right and left, I have wise men to be sure. You're about to hear from Bill Gilmer. You have read his bio. Bill was the energy expert at the Fed for a long time, and now Bill is, of course, at the University of Houston. And so, you learn pretty fast when you're involved in this thing that the whole economist world is pretty incestuous. So a month ago, the Fed and the GHP were saying that, we'd stack 500 rigs in the first 6 months. I think we're ahead of that. Bill's about to tell you what the real numbers are, but we're right ahead of ourselves. And so whether or not it's right or not, if it's right, Patrick Jankowski will take credit for it. If it's wrong, he'll blame it on Bill. So these guys are going to give you some convenient and inconvenient truths about the Houston economy. And, some immutable things. Obviously, as you know, Steve is a former state demographer, and if you believe in the phrase that I do, that demography is destiny, there are certain things that correspond to birth rate and demographics that transcend the weather vane of the rig count. And so interesting times call for wise men, and so you've done it. So the first wise man, Bill Gilmer.
Thank you. Let me move out here in front a little bit so I can at least see the slides too. I didn't bring very many, and I'm not going to talk very long with the slides, but I thought it would be good to at least set things up a little bit in terms of the discussion. I can tell you there are a lot of people in this world getting a lot of energy lessons these days. I get call after call after call. We're real estate investors in New York. What is happening in Houston? We're energy investors from Miami, from Chicago, from Seattle, from Los Angeles, from Hamburg, from India, from Japan. What is this upstream, downstream business, and what does that really mean? And they have not a clue. I try to start the conversation. I said, we can talk about the negative, but let's set this up a little bit first. If you look at the top dozen metro areas in the United States, and they're listed here, you can see that since 1969, despite all the ups and downs in Houston, it is a volatile economy dependent on a commodity. Houston, over that time period, has been the most successful large metro area in the United States in terms of measured income growth. Number two is Dallas. Actually, Austin doesn't make the top 12, but Austin, in fact, has grown faster than either Houston or Dallas, and some other places like McAllen and Laredo also make the list of growing faster than Houston over that time period. But for a large metro area, if you want to look through this, this is a very successful place to be and to have invested. Second point I would make is this is not the 1982 bust. That was a series of bad mistakes, not just oil, but real estate and banking. We went from an 80% decline in the rig count to a massive banking debacle that was predicated on saving your bank because you had invested in oil. We'll save it by investing in real estate. And of course, that did not work out. 9 of the top 10 holding companies in Texas evaporated. Only one to make it was Frost, only one of the top 10. Since then, the Asian financial crisis, you get a 45% decline in the rig count, no loss of employment in Houston. Enron, the tech bust, the 2001 recession, all coincide in Houston. A 35% decline in the rig count, a 1.3% decline in employment here. And then the financial crisis and the recession, we have this coincidence of a massive credit crunch, a huge recession, and at the same time a decline of 50% in the rig count. And we do lose 100,000 jobs. They return quickly. But that really was, on a national basis, what had happened to Texas in 1982, and we seem to have weathered that reasonably well. You know, if you want to count jobs in Texas, in Houston, we're going to get, assuming the U.S. economy remains strong, it's going to provide about 50,000 jobs here to the Houston metro area. It does that and what we have seen recently is a poor performance by the U.S. economy. Its inability to deliver those jobs to Houston, and we didn't miss them because oil was doing so well. Every 1.1% increase we get in energy here, in the energy base, we get about 18,000 jobs. So a 3% swing in energy from that 50,000 base, and we're at 100,000 jobs, or energy's a minus 3%, and we get no job growth at all. So energy matters here. Energy matters a lot. What we have seen recently is a very weak U.S. economy, energy delivering the jobs, and we're very fortunate right now. The U.S. economy appears to have put much of the damage behind it from the Great Recession, and we can count on those 50,000 jobs on the positive side probably for the next couple of years. Just a couple of scenarios. I gave up trying to tell people I knew where the price of oil was going about 10 years ago. But this was moving so fast. In December, I just put together, I said, look, I don't know what's going to happen, but let's suppose we got, for example, a 20% cut in exploration and expenditures. Starts right now, takes 2 quarters to sort of hit the bottom, stays at the bottom until early next year, and then early next year we begin to see the recovery sometime in 2016. It takes a couple of quarters to recover. We assume the U.S. economy remains strong, and I will talk about the downstream in just a minute. But if we just had this recession, just the decline in the rig count, or if we had a 33% decline in exploration and production expenditures, and in fact, that looks like where we are. Goldman Sachs is now saying 30%, for example. So we're headed for the worst of the 2 scenarios. In either case, this would have meant a very mild recession in Houston, a loss of maybe 20% cut would have cost us 15,000 or 16,000 jobs spread over a couple of years. We're talking with the 30% cut, maybe 25,000 jobs, about 1%, but spread over a couple of years. That is not all that's going on in Houston. Paul mentioned there are other pieces of the industry. We have 2 massive ethylene projects underway in Baytown, for example, a third in Freeport. You can see these $5 billion projects that are going up all over the Gulf Coast. There are now three LNG export facilities that have been permitted. It's being passed, and in Freeport, and another in Lake Charles, $10 billion projects. Put that in perspective, we're talking about $5 billion will buy you a dozen brand new downtown office towers. So if you think about what's going on in Baytown right now, it is extraordinary. And the east side of Houston, this year was actually set up to be a clash between who could get the blue-collar workers and the machine shop capacity in Houston. Was it going to be the upstream or was it going to be the downstream? and how much was each side willing to pay. Now, I think we're going to see this clash. What we're going to see is the east side of Houston basically boom and feel really good about life, and the west side of Houston not feel nearly as good. So it's going to split down the middle. The bottom line, where you would come out on all of this, scenario 2, which just seems to be where we are, we're talking about maybe 50,000 jobs if you add these construction workers up. Remember, these are temporary jobs. They won't be here for long. We're not going to be building apartment houses for them. We're not going to be building office space. These are different kind of employees that are going to be coming up, a lot of them out of the Permian Basin now and from South Texas. So we're going to, but my forecast right now would be right at this 50,000 job mark and 40,000 in 2016. Good. Okay, thanks. This is hardly a devastating time for Houston, but you have to remember the kind of worker that is coming into Houston. This is not fair to Baytown, but I kind of have visions of a 1960s house over on the east side somewhere with 4 pickup trucks parked on the front yard as the kind of jobs we're going to be counting next year. And you should consider that the west side of Houston, many of those office towers are going to see a lot of white-collar employment loss, and the damage is likely to be done in that part of town. So we have this effectively, we can count, I think, on the jobs, on these projects continuing. Goldman Sachs, again, for example, just put out a report that put a probability of 100% on all of those ethylene projects in Texas moving forward. So that's the good news for Houston, is that those jobs go forward. The bad news is the 30% cut in the rig count. So
I want to talk about a little bit different side of this, and that is, I'm a demographer, so I'm going to talk about the demographics. Because one of the things that I get asked is, okay, if the price drops out of the energy market, if the price of a barrel of oil goes down, how many people do we lose in a place like Houston, or as we often get asked, for Texas as a whole? And I often also get asked, well, I hear, for example, that we are gaining 1,000 people a day. The only problem we have about that is that not everybody's coming in. There are also people going out. And so I've been in the embarrassing situation of having to contradict one of our higher elected officials when, in fact, the total number that we were gaining was more like, about 500. But let's not get into that now. Let's take a look at just a little bit of how much gain we've had, and then we'll talk about this relationship. Clearly, this is the most recent data we have. If you look at Texas, we're at the top of the heap in terms of population growth. We've added this decade 1.8 million people, and we've had about 6 or so of that, about 300,000 to 400,000 of that has been in the Houston area. So we've had substantial growth, and this is not the first decade, it's the second or third decade of that kind of growth. So you can see that at the top. Now, here's where my North Dakota roots come out. I had to show this particular slide because as a native North Dakotan, I did not ever believe I would live long enough to see North Dakota at the top of any population chart. And you can see that it's 9.9%. The largest in the country, and there's a place where I do expect there'll be some population redecline, if you will, as a result of what's happening in terms of the energy market. But again, 7% growth rate in a place like Texas is phenomenal. And this is where we've stood in the last decade. We've been doing this for a while. 1.2 million added to our MSA last time. It's going to be over 2 million this time. Harris County has had tremendous growth. If you look, for example, at the first 3 years up there, because that's all we have for sub-state areas at this point, and we've added, over 250,000. At that very top of that chart, you can see we're talking about 243,000 people added to Harris County. This is a chart, however, that I wanted you to take a look at. It's a little bit hard, but it's very important to understand in terms of what's going on. This is, first of all, the green up here is the price of oil. And what we have then are three components of population change. One of them is the two blue ones are, the one on the bottom is the natural increase rate, the blue rate there. And you see that it doesn't matter in terms of the price of oil, in terms of what happens to natural increase, and it doesn't matter in terms of the top chart, which is international migration. Both of those continue. And you can look at any period of time when we've had this in terms of Texas, and both natural increase, that excess of births over deaths, stays about the same, and international migration takes place about at the same rate because they're coming for different reasons, okay? And people are not really making their decision of how many children they have on the basis of the price of oil. But what does have an effect is if you look at the green line, which is the price of oil, and you compare it to the red line, which is domestic migration, as you can see, that does tend to go up, at least in part, with the increase in oil production. But notice that, again, it's flattened off in the last period of time. The only point of all of those is to simply say that there's not a root step of demographics and economics. Okay? In other words, there's a lot of factors that go into our population growth. Some of them are economic, some of them are related to lots of other factors. So even if price of oil goes substantially lower, it doesn't mean that Houston is going to become a wasteland of population. It doesn't mean that all of those new condo developments are going to go away. Now it may, as I think as Bill has indicated, that some of them will slow down in terms of how many we're building, et cetera, and maybe the speed or progress at which they're completed. But population will not go away. It may slow down, but will not go away in terms of our growth. Texas has grown through markets for really nearly its entire history. Not at the same speed, but certainly population is driven by a lot of different factors. And I think that's an important takeaway for us to have as we look at issues. This kind of gives you the components of Texas population growth in the last 3 years, 3.25 years. And you can see natural increase was 53% of that. International migration was another 16. Now you're looking at about 70% of all the growth came as a result of two factors that we just see have not been very much affected by or related to at least the price of oil. And domestic migration that has perhaps some relationship, but not a clear relationship either to what happens in terms of the oil market. In other words, a lot of our growth, as you can see, 2 of every 3 is related to other kinds of factors. And this simply shows it for the MSA. And here we see again that 68% of the total growth was a function of natural increase, excess of births over deaths, and 20% from international migration. And domestic was about a third. Now, this doesn't mean it's inconsequential. A third of our growth is important, but it is not, our population change is not totally driven by what happens in one sector of our economy. We're a very multi-sectored economy in terms of Houston and the area as a whole. Finally, this is Harris County. And I think this is very important to look at because Harris County, 58% of the growth in Harris County is a result of natural increase, the excess of births over deaths. This is the last 3 years. International migration is 26%. The total amount due to domestic migration, 16%. Now understand that when we look at Harris County, that's different than looking at Houston. That's different than looking at the MSA. But we have a very different population composition the closer you get to the center of this metropolitan area. For example, one piece of information that I often give when I talk about Texas as a whole is I'll say we have 3 of the 10 largest cities. And, we have Houston at number 4. We have San Antonio at number 7, Dallas at number 9 in terms of cities, in terms of total size. And I asked the question of, what do you think the percent of non-Hispanic white children are in those, of the children in those 3, what percent are non-Hispanic white for children? The answer is the smallest percent is in the city of Dallas at 14.5% of the children, 1 of every 7 children, okay? And, of course, as we all know, Houston is not at all like Dallas, okay? So our percent is 14.6%, okay? And San Antonio, it's 16.9%. Well, my only point there is the population groups that are involved in various kinds of economic activities are driven in different areas by different things, but population has kind of runs on its own set of factors. So population will be impacted, but anything we can see, similar to what Bill is saying, except even more so, is that I don't expect to see a large population decline if the price of oil continues to go down. And frankly, we're going to continue to grow, I think, but we might grow a little bit more if we have a stronger energy market come back. So I think that my point again, and the final point I would make is some other time, or if you want to talk to me afterwards, I'll be glad to explain to you why we don't grow by 1,000 people a day in Texas.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Steve. So percentage of non-Hispanic white children in school notwithstanding, the percentage of the growth in Texas that you just saw, the 58% of natural growth, percentage of the growth, what percentage of that is Hispanic?
The Hispanic part is about
60%. So, you just can't exaggerate the demographic change. And so, not that the Hispanic population is monolithic, but for workforce and for education reasons, you got to keep that in mind. I get asked a lot, why is GHP messing around with pre-K? We said, we can't not. We can't not. When you look at the demographic patterns and you look at the workforce demands of the petrochemical industry, and those things will get built. I mean, BP is delaying something because they've got cash coming from upstream that's interrupted. But workforce and educating Hispanic young people, that's the critical variable for the state of Texas. I think you know that, but that's why GHP is involved in all these things. It's not soft-headed stuff. We just have to. The Middle Skills Initiative, you get the point. You get the point. So we're going to move into Q&A here in a second, but while we're doing Inconvenient Truths, I thought I would do a very timely and convenient truth for you. You may think, and you may be right, that macro factors and private sector economics that's what matters, and public sector finance is really, it's rounding error, it's irrelevant, we don't expect much from politicians. All those are defensible points of view. But if you grew up like I grew up, public finance was dinner table fare. And so I can't help but pay attention to it. And I can't help but have made the Greater Houston Partnership pay attention to it, because we're about to hit a wall in the city of Houston of significant consequence. Mark Watts has led a task force. We've done some work on this. We're trying to figure out, do we turn our work into an online calculator? But we're trying to synthesize a very difficult subject and make it comprehensible to the electorate. If it can be a lens through which the next mayoral election occurs, so be it. And so I just wanted to preview some of the real bad news out there. And those of you finance types say, well, you can just refinance that debt and push it out and you can pre-fund it and blah, blah, blah. No. I'm telling you, we've had a lot of really smart people looking at this. And what's about to happen to public finance in the city of Houston and its otherwise implications. Talk about that for a second. we've all been out there pushing Houston most of our adult lives, and there's a standard playbook. Well, we got, we're mid-continent and we're friendly, and we got all copious land, low cost of living, and low state and local tax burden, and we got demographics, and workforce, and blah, blah, blah. Affordable housing. Some of those things aren't true anymore. So there's no media in the room, I don't think. But, it's not true that we have a low state and local tax burden. It's no longer true. It's no longer true that housing in Harris County is, more affordable than other places in the city. So, the stuff I'm about to show you suggests that there's a mayoral election that will occur this year, and it's an important election. There's about 700 guys running, about 4 or 5 of them are in the room, I'm sure. They're all, and I say guys on purpose because we had a girl and she dropped out. But all of those are friends of mine. They're all friends of yours. And so, my selection, I've told them all, will be highly quantitative. How do you want to solve the municipal finance crisis that's looming for the city of Houston? So with that set up, let me just run you through these horrible slides. So, unfunded pension liability, you wondered what happened at Y2K. The computers didn't crash, but public finance did. This happened in Washington, too, actually. Bill White's book. Ironically, Bill was the mayor during a lot of this, as you know, and he's a great friend of mine and a brilliant guy. But he wrote a book that basically said Congress lost themselves about year 2000 in terms of debt management. Well, in some ways, in the city of Houston, we lost ourselves, too. This puts things in perspective. You figure, pensions, golly, well, it can't be that big a deal. This year, before retiree health care, pension cost to the city of Houston goes up 26%. That's the good news. It gets worse after that. And we're talking about flat headcount. I mean, the city of Houston has grown enormously, but police, fire, municipal, that headcount has been flat. So this is not growth in the workforce. This is growth in the obligation, the unfunded obligation, otherwise known as debt. So here's a lot of city functions that you know well. Here's the street improvement budget that you wish were bigger. Well, look at this right here. So is this funding history? Well, you're funding pensions of people that are still contributing to the public workforce. So it's not funding history in the purest sense. But what we're not doing for sure is funding the future. It's not education. It's not infrastructure. So take a hard look at that. Take a hard look at that. And make sure to ask your next friendly mayoral candidate what he wants to do. This right here, again, it's a very simple chart, real expenses versus revenue. It's actually illegal for the city of Houston to borrow to fund operating expenses. Has it happened? Probably. Illegal or not, it's unwise. Got to stop it. Got to stop it. Okay, so obviously all this actuarial stuff is mind-numbing, unless you're an actuary. The firefighters are having a huge fight with the mayor, and we can talk about why the firefighters' problem does run through Austin. The municipals and the cops does not, and Bill White did a good job early in his tenure in sort of cranking down the out years so the multipliers don't go crazy in the municipal and in the cops program the way they do in the firefighters. And we'll see what happens, but she may get meet and confer from the courts. She may get meet and confer from the legislature. I don't know, but the firefighters' internal actuarial calculation on rate of return for their investment portfolio is 8.5%. I could ask for a show of hands. Everybody, feel good about that one? Your college fund? What are you counting on? So, but the point is, the sensitivity to that return number is almost logarithmic. If you only do 7.5% relative to 8.5%, watch out. That's you. You are here. That's your tax bill. Now our state and local tax burden became uncompetitive. Not just unadvantaged, but uncompetitive. So, sorry, but had to be done. Audience Q&A. What would the approval of the Keystone Pipeline and crude oil exports mean for the Houston economy? I'm going to give that to Bill.
Well, first we have to assume that Canadian tar sands make any sense, right? That is a high-cost source of oil, and so we're going to have to get the price of oil back up before the Canadians are going to be doing that on a long-term basis. It's become a political issue. Both sides have painted themselves well into a corner that I don't think there's any way for them to extract themselves. It's important to Houston primarily because this heavy crude, which actually I understand is actually being delivered to Houston through another pipeline, is actually our forte here on the Gulf Coast. We talked a little bit about the downstream, which primarily petrochemicals, but this is America's great refining region, the petrochemical crescent that runs from Corpus Christi over on the west side through Houston and then over to Baton Rouge and New Orleans. And our ability to process difficult crudes is really the Gulf Coast specialty. The Mexicans, for example, who produce the heavy crude out of the Gulf of Mexico, own half of the Deer Park refinery because Shell had the technology 20 years ago to refine the crude, that crude that comes out of Mexico. A lot of our gasoline exports out of Houston are just Mexican crude that's refined here and taken right back to Mexico. But it plays to our specialty. It's important. Light crudes have become much more prevalent in coming up out of South Texas. I don't know that it's a real game changer, but plays to our strengths. It's a fight more about energy than it is per se. I think a fight. It's about more of a fight about the future of energy, the future of hydrocarbons, than it has real relevance, day-to-day relevance to what's happening here in the Houston area. Would be my take on it. Paul may very well disagree with that.
No, I do disagree with it. And again, all my knowledge is repeated, somebody else's. Greg Armstrong, who runs Plains All-American, replaced me as chairman of the Houston Fed, and he says what Bill says, and that it's less important than it was, and not just on a commodity price sensitivity basis. Markets have done what markets do, and they solve problems in another way. You know, they work around a blockage. And the more disturbing data point to throw out there is, you know, Penny Pritzker is the Secretary of Commerce. She did her little victory tour through Houston 18 months or so ago. We had a photo op out at the port, and then we had some time with her, and I said, you know, Madam Secretary, anybody that comes to Houston in August, we appreciate. Most especially a cabinet officer. But, you know, we do you no great service to just blow smoke at you. There is a widespread belief here in the non-political class that this administration understands nothing about energy markets. And Keystone's Exhibit A. You know, that crude doesn't stay in the Canadian sands. It goes to the Pacific, and it gets on a boat, and then we get to bid against the Asians for it, and it may or may not come back to the port of Long Beach. So in the name of environmentalism, that we've put oil on the water, nobody really can defend that. And she said, well, my chief of staff's going to give you his card, and we'll be right back to you. That's fascinating. It's been 18 months ago.
I've got a question for
Next
for
question.
Bill.
Hey, Will.
Bill, excuse me, I'll stand up. Right here, Bill. You've addressed the subject of East Houston versus West Houston. So this is really a kind of a bifurcated question. One is, talk a little bit about the salary dispersions that go between the two. And the other, I think, more pressing question is that based on a lot of the economic forecasts we've seen from RBC and others, there is a renaissance going on in the petrochemical business. But my question to you is, that's driven by low ethane prices, natural gas, and that was predicated upon $125 Brent. And Brent, in the last 3 years, has traded at a premium to WTI, and now we're reverting back to the more historical range where Brent may actually sell at a discount again. So if you're pricing your refined product against the Europeans and Brent, what's that going to do to your forecast about the economic growth coming out of petrochemicals if the U.S. petrochemical industry is not quite as advantageously positioned as we thought it was a year ago? Or is that just Boulder Dash? Thanks.
The east side, west side division, probably, you know, as you look inside that complex of producers and service companies in Houston, those are very well compensated jobs. Those jobs, on average in Houston, pay just about $150,000 apiece per person inside that. The 120, 130, well, we're probably up to 140,000 jobs now inside that complex. So, and that is just about twice what the average job pays in Houston, almost exactly. On the other hand, what's on the east side of Houston are going to be many very well compensated jobs as well. These are skilled jobs, these are union jobs. By and large, they'll earn union wages, and in fact, the Associated General Contractors has made an agreement that they will pay about $40 in per diem per day for anybody working more than 40 miles from home, which simply adds to that compensation. The unions, on the other hand, to bring their workers here to get the $40 a day, have pretty much agreed to give up all of their work rules. So it's really an interesting event. But they're very well compensated jobs. I think the big factor looking at those jobs is that they're not permanent jobs. They're going to pay. They're going to pay with overtime. They'll pay something like 2/3, I would guess, of what you're going to see for the jobs lost on the west side of town. I think the big distinction is the permanence of those jobs and who you can serve. And if you're building apartments in River Oaks, Montrose area, then you're going to have to think really hard about this flow of young white-collar workers into the Houston area, for example, or the high-end retail. You're simply that kind of job growth is likely to be stymied a bit. And in terms of the question about the price of ethane, the economics don't work right at this moment. Again, I'll go back to this Goldman Sachs report, which basically looked at that question, but they looked at it, again, looking through the event. Right now, in North America, we make petrochemicals with natural gas liquids. Ethane is the natural gas liquid. The petrochemical is ethylene, and the final product will be something like polyethylene, the plastic, or polyvinyl chloride, those white pipes underneath your kitchen sink, for example. And that has given us enormous competitive advantage with the price of oil at $100 per barrel over the last 2 or 3 years, with natural gas priced at $4. The margin on ethylene in the U.S. for a product priced at 60 cents per pound, the all-in margin has been 40 cents per pound. Now, that's a good business to be in. And in fact, everybody now would like to be in that business, and that's part of the reason you have this half-dozen ethylene plants under construction, plus the downstream plastic plants that go with them. And I think if you look through this event, and you realize that the price of oil won't be $40 per barrel forever, and that the pricing on natural gas generally, which bleeds ethylene, probably goes back to $4.50. We can produce all the natural gas we want probably at $4.50 to $5, which is $30 oil. So if the rest of the world is still producing plastic with oil while we're doing it with gas, over the long term, these plants work, and again, Goldman Sachs puts 100% chance that these big companies, deep-pocketed big companies, are going to continue with those projects.
Thank you, Bill. We've got a demographic question for Steve that basically involves undocumented.
Yeah, the question is, do your population demographic change counts include undocumented? Certainly our demographic do, and are included in our work as well as others. And I think it's important to kind of put that in perspective. We have in Texas, depending on who's doing the estimation, an estimate of about 1.5 million undocumented persons in Texas. We have in the United States about 11 million undocumented immigrants. And the best work in that area is done by the Pew Hispanic Center, and is led by a gentleman who's originally from Dallas, educated at the University of Texas in their population program, a guy by the name of Jeff Bissell. And I often say to Jeff, Jeff, you know, when I bring those up, people say, but how do you know? He said, after all, they're undocumented. How can you be sure that there's not, as you sometimes hear in different audiences, oh, there's 20 million or there's 30 million undocumented immigrants? And I think Jeff has a pretty good answer. And that answer is, he says, you know, Steve, there is one thing you cannot hide, and that is dying. And if there are really 20 million and not 10 million undocumented immigrants in the United States, they are the healthiest group of people who have ever walked the face of the earth, because they die at a level of about 10 million. So, yes, in terms of our population counts, there is an estimation in there that takes into account the undocumented.
This is a question sparked by the last couple of days in Austin, and I guess for any of the three of you, how should we think about the likely impact on Houston in the near future with the new Greg Abbott administration coming in, direction they're going, things they're likely working on? Much impact on Houston? How do you see it?
Well, we now have a U.S. Senator, a governor, and a lieutenant governor from Houston, which is a combination we haven't had in many, many years. Having said that, I think the impact of that is muted to nil. The opportunity for, and Steve has done a lot of work on this, the opportunity to do Medicaid expansion, which those are words you can't say in Austin. They're toxic and you die immediately if you say Medicaid expansion. So there's other words you can put around it, but we are exporting as a region $10 billion in new Medicaid taxes. Raise your hand if you're paying them. We're sending $10 billion to other people's indigent health care and low-income health care equation. That's not good. You know, you don't have to be a demographic expert. You don't have to be an economist or as smart as these wise men to figure out exporting $10 billion that we weren't exporting 3 years ago is a bad thing. We could get pretty straightforward, and CMS has said they'd work with us. They won't call it a block grant, and we won't call it Medicaid expansion, but there's some conversation that was promising a month ago that we could see our way clear to getting $7.2 billion into the Houston area, cost recovery on Medicaid expansion. By the way, $100 million of that could easily displace your property tax. Today you pay 18 cents per thousand to support the hospital district, which is how we support low-income health care, along with cost shifting from your private plans and charity care in this community. You could get $100 million in real-time tax relief right now on your property tax if you did any form of Medicaid expansion. The chance of that in the last 3 or 4 weeks has gone from promising to unpromising. So again, it has nothing to do with Greg being from Houston, but obviously there's a bill out there to cap the county revenues just like the city revenues are capped. And if that conversation could be changed from revenue caps, which are probably bad public policy, they're a blunt object, to $100 million in property tax relief and 7.2 of the $10 billion that we're pulling into the system coming back to Harris County, I'm for that. I'm for that.
I think the statewide view of that, just to throw a couple of figures done by the economists at University of Texas, is that we could gain, in terms of assistance for people without health care, through existing programs, about $65 billion over the next few years in Texas. Now one might say, well, we don't want to have that for a variety of reasons, but understand that through our own tax revenues, we're going to pay for $32 billion for health care in other states. If we have, in other words, there's no net coming to us. We would be about 65 net, but if we do nothing, we're going to still end up supporting health care in other states through our tax revenues at a rate of about $32 billion over the next few years. So one could argue it's a lose-lose situation. We don't obtain any of the potential benefit, and we, in fact, end up supporting that particular process in other states. Now, whether that's worth it for lots of other reasons, that's a different issue. But certainly, the task force that I chaired and that we've had several times over the last several years, who has economists from all over the state, other medical experts as well, conservative, liberals, politically, have looked at this repeatedly. And it's very difficult to see how we gain by doing nothing in terms of either health care for our citizens or in terms of fiscal factors.
And Ed Emmett, I encourage you to talk to Judge Emmett when you see him next. I mean, he's not your neighborhood pinko, and he's right where we are, and that is hate Obamacare, need Medicaid expansion. So if we can disconnect those arguments, that'd be a good thing fiscally.
All of the judges of all of the major metropolitan areas have come out in favor of us doing something, and most of the large chambers of commerce have done the same thing. So this isn't an issue that there hasn't been a lot of thought given to, a lot of looking at the issue, and it's one where we really need to be, I think, giving it some consideration. It's not a left or right issue. It's an issue now of purely dollars and cents, and which end of that giving or taking we want to be in. Okay,
we've got the real estate agent question. What do you estimate the impact of home prices to be on the west side? That's so much more fun than Medicaid expansion. You can't believe it.
That's obviously a bill question.
Sorry?
That's obviously a bill question.
Well, we can, there's anybody else that has thoughts here can jump right in. I wish we had Barton Smith up here. As you've seen, he has this avoided commute premium, this concentric circles. If you've seen that, he does this map of Houston that's sort of interesting about how much people are willing to pay not to commute. And again, the change in inner city schools and inner city demographics and lifestyles and retirees and all that all feeds in there as well. It's not just avoided commute. But the answer to this question is how far on the west side? How far? You know, because it's all about the avoided commute. Is that the right way to look at this bill?
Yeah. Well, actually, I think there's a shorter-term answer to that, too. And over the last 2 years in Houston, with the population pressure, with the employment gains, we have seen the price of housing in Houston rise by over 20%. And really, the root cause of that has been that the normal, this is very un-Houston-like, right? Normally, we can just carpet the prairie out there with as many houses as we need and almost on demand. We went into this recession with a limited supply of lots. Actually, we had lots of lots for smaller homes that were for the 30% of homes that were financed in 2003 and 2004 in Houston with subprime that needed very small lots. We had plenty of those. The market changed, moved upscale. We did not have the lots. Financing was not available. There's a large penalty for bankers right now to get into the lot development business and to be financing that. And so we sort of, for a while, have simply turned over the lot development business to large builders. And there was a very limited supply of lots in Houston. So the safety valve for this enormous influx of new employment and population here in Houston was broken. We could not build those new homes. That seems like this year, 2015, is the year that the lot supply machine has finally geared up. And this was to be the year, even with the continued employment pressure and population pressure, this was to be the year that we would see the lot supply move in front of demand finally. And we would probably begin to see some decline in lot prices and ultimately in home prices as a result. That obviously may be accelerated now. However, we have locked out so many people from the new home market, either by the price or the simple availability of homes, that I think that there's an adequate backlog to keep us busy for much of this year. And we may not see the price decline for a while. But ultimately, that marginal cost of land, our ability to bring those lots on, is going to put a downward pressure on those homes that have been purchased over the last couple of years. You can look at the cost of lots in Houston. There's something called the Lincoln Land Institute that has a long historical series on land prices in Houston, and believe me, they are way up and they are way down. We're not too far out of line, actually, with the historical average, but we're above it. And I think there's certainly room for some correction in those land prices and ultimately in home prices in Houston. A lot of home builders here, when I bought a home here 20 years ago, you had to first pick your lot and tell the builder what features you wanted. Builders over the last several years have been able to just put those houses up, decorate them with every custom feature they can think of, and you can take it or not. And so that is also likely to work to bring some of those home prices down as well.
Steve Newton has a question. I don't know who was first, as between you two. Y'all fight it out.
Go ahead, Steve. Thank you. And this is a question I think directed towards Dr. Gilmer. In your 30% of immigration to this area, can you break that down a little bit and talk about the effect of diversification in this city versus the traditional E and P side of the business? We've talked a lot this morning about East Side, West Side. What we really haven't addressed is the diversification and to what extent that has muted the drop in employment and whether that is a path forward for the city.
Who feels the best with that one? Bill?
This is industrial diversification.
Just all forms of healthcare,
Yeah.
other aspects of the
Right,
economy.
not ethnicity, but
Right.
by economic.
Economic,
Zip code.
economic
The hard,
diversity, of course.
let me say the health care is a hard question. And I think we're doing a study now at the University of Houston to find out exactly what contribution health care makes to the growth of Houston. When you look at this giant complex, this amazing complex that we have, that is the Texas Medical Center, you have to realize that MD Anderson's gift of land he donated money and a committee decided to buy that land to concentrate much of the medical community in Houston on that land. But at the same time, every large city in America has an enormous healthcare community. And the question is whether that healthcare community here in Houston is actually bringing money into the community. Is it simply a service to the city that is not a generator of growth, or does it bring money to the city? And so we are collecting data with the help of the Texas Medical Center to answer how many patients actually come here from outside the metro area, how many of the students, what kind of grants and federal grants and state grants do they actually bring into the area that all contribute outside money. That's what drives growth here. We don't get rich taking each other's pulse or taking in each other's laundry. It has to be money from the outside. And so the preliminary data we have from just a few of the big institutions so far indicates that it is and has become a significant driver of growth here, which I think most of us suspected all along, but we're still putting numbers together there. But that said, I showed you that sort of a different way to look at it, that over the years and over a period of several years, the U.S. economy's growth contributes, probably contributes about half the jobs in Houston. And over a period of time, a long period of time, the energy industry here contributes the other half. And I can't really see that has changed since the late 1980s here, that it has been about half energy. That mix changes dramatically from one time to the next. The U.S. economy was down and energy was up, and it looks like everything in Houston depends on energy. And in fact, at that brief period of time, the last 3 years, it actually did. You go back to the early 2000s, the energy industry, not profitable, not expanding, and it looked like everything was, we were diversifying because the energy industry really was not all that healthy at the time. But over the years, it just looks like about a 50-50 split that really has not changed dramatically over the years. And the split between upstream and downstream, maybe we can discuss another time. In terms of the business cycle, it is the upstream that almost always matters. The downstream, smaller in terms of CapEx, and the downstream, typically smaller in terms of CapEx, and much more stable over time.
So let me just use this second. We've got another question, of course, to put in a plug for Bobby Robinson, what he's doing at the Texas Medical Center. If you haven't seen Bobby or heard him at the State of Medical Center or any other event, make it your business. Maybe just go to their website and look at some of their master planning. TMC, for the longest time, was a benign administrator of parking, and they were nonprofit, and they read that mission to be adverse to commercialization of anything surrounding medicine or research. Well, Dr. Robbins has turned that on its head, and again, I've fought a lot of these fights over time. We want everything in Houston to happen organically. If we were going to have a biomed cluster, it would have happened organically by now. There has to be a catalyst, and Bobby's decided that'll be TMC. His board has changed the deed restrictions on some of the after-acquired property, not the Clayton property. And what is and can be in the medical center under his leadership is quite exciting, and I encourage you to pay some attention there.
Paul, you spoke briefly about the growing pension liability that the city is facing. What's a reasonable range of solutions to deal with that really challenging issue?
Well, there'll be no firefighters responding to my home tonight, so do not play with matches. We have had a world-class forum, the Arnold Institute, the Arnold Foundation. They've taken this as an area of interest and hired some world-class people, and we had people from San Jose, it was in this very room, from Utah and from Rhode Island that have fought the real fights on the ground to get this under control. The county, interestingly, has a defined contribution plan, just like you do, period, end of story. County's fine, So to say that public sector is different because they don't get Social Security, and that's under review. Kevin Brady has filed a bill with bipartisan support, so he's dead in the next primary. He talked to a guy from Massachusetts. So the whole idea that the public sector is different and the pension structures have to be different, that argument is limited in scope and truth. But what you have to do, rather than to move to an outright defined contribution plan, anything that is savings-based will remain solvent over time. In other words, if what you put into it has something to do with what you get out of it, actuarially everything's going to be okay. But we got these drop plans and COLAs. If you don't know what a drop plan is, see me after class, but you'd love to have one if you don't. But again, they just make the inputs have nothing to do with the outputs. They're just these little mathematical multipliers that have to do with your last salary, and you've seen all the games that get played. So defined benefit is sort of a toxic word for the public unions, but savings-based, if you want to talk about it in a constructive way, that's what you should do.
Well, let's thank the panel. Paul, Bill, Steve. Great presentation, gentlemen.